That's right, folks, your girl has a new diagnosis and it's a doozy. If this is your first time finding me here on YouTube, hi, hello, my name is Megan, and usually I make content pretty exclusively about autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity as a whole. But today I am both very excited and very nervous to tell you about a new diagnosis called OSDD, which stands for Other Specified Dissociative Disorder, a diagnosis which apparently I have. So let's start with the most obvious question. What is OSDD? OSDD is a dissociative disorder. It's in the same family as DID, which stands for dissociative identity disorder, which used to be known as multiple personality disorder. OSDD and DID have a couple of key differences, but I'll explore that in a different video. For now, what you need to know is that OSDD can look a lot of different ways. I am newly diagnosed and still learning, but this is what my version of OSDD looks like. I have semi-distinct selves that all live in my head. They're not quite as distinct as they might be with something like DID, but they are more distinct than someone who doesn't have a dissociative disorder but does something like parts work. My different parts have varying degrees of communication with each other, varying degrees of understanding of one another, compassion, empathy for one another, and differing levels of awareness of one another even. Also, all of my parts identify as me. There aren't any parts that feel super other. I mean, there might be one or two now that I'm saying that, but generally speaking, my parts all feel like me. But they are undeniably separate in some really important ways that I will talk about in just a minute. The biggest reason that I believe I'm diagnosed with OSDD and not DID is because I do not experience full-blown amnesia. There are a couple of key memories that are just missing entirely from the whole system, like stuff that we know happened that other people witnessed and we know we were there and it just is gone. But generally speaking, my parts all share memories from when they're fronting, which brings me to the next section, which is let's talk about some of the terminology around dissociative disorders. You may have heard the term alters, or as I've been calling it, like parts or selves. All of those are great words to describe a dissociated system. You just want to use the terms that each individual system prefers. So like for me, I don't love the term alters. It just doesn't fit with the way I conceptualize of my OSDD, so I prefer parts or selves. Next up, let's talk about that term I just used, dissociated system. What does that mean? A dissociated system is the way that I like to refer to myself and to other people who have OSDD, DID, or are otherwise plural. It can feel weird to refer to someone who experiences this as a person because they're really not just one person, they're lots of people. So to me, it makes a lot more sense to refer to them as a dissociated system. They are a system of consciousness, not just one consciousness. Another term that you'll probably hear a lot in the world of OSDD, DID, and plurality is fronting. If a part is fronting, that means they're the ones that are predominantly conscious and making the most decisions. This doesn't mean that other parts can't be co-conscious, which means they're also kind of up there, but usually there's one part fronting at a time. I have heard of some people talk about co-fronting, which is really interesting to me and I need to look into more, but generally there is a part that's kind of out and about, and then the other parts are kind of like lingering in the background. If there are other terms that I use in this video or that you hear about in plural spaces that you're curious about, feel free to leave me a comment below and I will be sure to answer your question in another video. All right, so far I've been talking about this in a pretty heady way, right? Like this is what this is what that is, but like what does OSDD feel like? Well, like I said, OSDD can look a lot of different ways, but I can tell you what it looks like for me. Probably the biggest red flag for my OSDD is the way that my depression presents. I've been diagnosed with depression in some form or another for over a decade. But my depression has always puzzled my providers because it is so intense and so awful, just like regular depression is intense and awful, but it's so short. And when it's gone, it's gone. I'm not repressing it. It's not gnawing at the back of my mind. It's just gone. And I genuinely feel better. And this feeling better seems to just happen at random. Like the meds don't make it more or less frequent and therapy doesn't seem to really touch it. I don't feel in control of it. It just happens. For a while there, we were actually considering a borderline personality disorder diagnosis because that is one of the few diagnoses where this rapid but very intense emotional experience is described. But the thing is, I didn't fit a lot of the other criteria of borderline personality disorder. And I come to find out recently that borderline personality disorder also has a lot of dissociative features, and that's probably what my providers were picking up on. It's just that DID, OSDD, these things are so stigmatized that a lot of providers, if you can go to school and hold a job, they assume you couldn't possibly have those things. And I'm really, really lucky to have found a therapist who doesn't view things that way. But we'll get into why it took so long for me to get diagnosed in a minute. First, I want to get back to what OSDD actually feels like for me. So there's my weird, fast, but intense depression. That is kind of part one. Part two is ever since my mental health fell apart in 2012, like well and truly collapsed, I have had this very persistent voice in my head that sounds a lot like me, but I'm not really in charge of it, that pretty much constantly asks like,
Megan, are you okay?
And I used to think it was maybe an OCD thing, like a mental compulsion, right? Like if I say, Megan, are you okay? Then I'll be okay. But I'm starting to realize that I think that's actually a part that's trying to take care of me. Another aspect of my experience with OSDD is the way that I tend to project onto fictional characters. And if people don't like that character, or even if they like them, but they don't like them as much as I think they should, I feel very personally threatened, and it can send me into a huge depression spiral. P.S. Some of the characters that I 100% relate to, and please don't shit on them because I will cry, you will make me cry, is Chidi Anagonye, David Rose, Matilda, Rebecca Bunch, Lorelai Gilmore, and probably more that I'm forgetting. Another big sign of my OSDD actually comes from my childhood, which is that growing up, I was a really big maladaptive daydreamer. Maladaptive daydreaming is basically where you daydream so much and so intensely that it detracts from your real life. Growing up, I probably spent 75 to 80% of my time in a daydream and very little time being present in my life. Another big sign of my OSDD right now is that I will be paying attention to something, maybe watching a TV show, and I'm not looking at my phone, I'm not like daydreaming, I'm paying attention. And my husband will be like, oh, whoa, did you see that? And I'll realize, no, I didn't see it somehow. And I don't understand how that's possible. And I'm starting to realize that one part was watching, and then when I was asked a question, another part switched out and they didn't see it. Another big sign of my OSDD is that I don't identify with my body, like at all. Like I don't dislike it, it's fine. It just feels irrelevant. Like at my core, who I am, when I conceive of myself, I imagine like a cloud of synapses and wires and lights. This body feels like a vessel to carry me places. So yeah, that's kind of what my experience with OSDD is like. I'm sure there are lots of other ways to have OSDD and lots of other ways it can look, but this is mine. The next question that I get a lot when I tell people I have OSDD is, how did you know? Like, how did you get diagnosed? So this is a bit of a winding story, but basically it starts in January of 2025. I, every January, host this big event called the Neurodivergent Lived Experience Summit. And I invite people with all different types of neurotypes to come and speak about their lived experience being neurodivergent. And this past January, I invited Katie Keach, who I will tag below, and they are plural. And they gave an amazing talk, and I don't remember watching the talk and thinking, oh my gosh, I'm plural, I'm a system. Like, I didn't have that feeling. It was just like, oh, this is like a really knowledgeable, cool person, and I'm so glad they're here. But they recommended this book called Dissociation Made Simple by Dr. Jamie Marich, who I will also tag in the description. And I don't know what made me read the book. I think maybe part of me knew that I was a system and was craving that information. I don't know. For some reason, even though I wasn't diagnosed with a dissociative disorder, I decided to start reading Dissociation Made Simple. And you guys, this book read me to filth. I related to every single page of this book. This book described my entire life, and it became very clear to me pretty quickly that this was something I had to at least investigate. So I brought it up to my therapist, who was pretty clear that she just didn't know enough about dissociation to tell me yes or no if I had a dissociative disorder. Which, kudos to her. We need more therapists who are willing to say, I don't know enough about this to diagnose or not diagnose you. If I had had that when I was exploring autism and ADHD, I would have been saved a lot of invalidation. Anyway, so I sought out a new therapist who specializes in DID, and she gave me this assessment called the DES-2, which stands for Dissociative Experiences Scale 2. So we went through that, I answered the questions, she looked at my score and asked me some more questions about some of the questions, and then she told me that there was pretty much no doubt in her mind that I have a dissociative disorder. So that's how I got diagnosed. And some people also wonder, like, why did it take so long? Like, I've been in therapy for 12 years. You would think someone would catch this by now, and literally no one did. So how did that happen? Well, according to at least one study, folks with DID may spend from 5 to 12 years in therapy before getting accurately diagnosed. And I have to imagine the same probably goes for OSDD, or at least it did in my case. I think part of the problem is that most people, including clinicians, believe that dissociative disorders are rare. But the truth is they're not. When you combine the prevalence of DID and the prevalence of OSDD, which are both dissociative disorders, even at their most conservative estimates, you get a prevalence of dissociative disorders of 2.4%, which is the same prevalence as bipolar disorder. And the other reason dissociative disorders can take a minute to diagnose is because they are intentionally covert. They are intentionally hidden and hard to identify, both for clinicians and for the people experiencing them. So finally, what am I doing with this information? Okay, I know I have OSDD. Now what? Well, first and foremost, I'm building trust and rapport with my new therapist so that we can start EMDR therapy. I won't dig into what EMDR therapy is in this video, but if you want to know, if you want me to make a video about it, just let me know in the comments, but it's a type of trauma therapy. I'm also working on improving communication between my parts and just helping my parts be more aware of each other, more willing to talk to each other, and I'm even trying to get better at like switching who's out front on purpose, although that is tricky. Also, I'm sharing about it online. When I was trying to research OSDD, there was some stuff online, but like not a lot, not enough. And also, I'm really candid with you guys about my autism and my ADHD and my depression. It would feel very weird and secretive for me to like not tell you about this new diagnosis. And I will say, this discovery, this diagnosis has already radically improved my life. I often experience summertime seasonal depression that usually knocks me on my ass for the entire summer. And it's been way better this summer so far, simply because I know how my depression works within my parts now. I'm better at taking care of my individual parts now, as opposed to expecting myself to behave as a cohesive whole when I am not. OSDD, by the way, is absolutely part of the neurodivergent umbrella, so I will probably keep talking about it on this channel, but don't worry, there's still going to be plenty of autism and ADHD content too. I know you're all going to be so supportive in the comments, so I thank you ahead of time, and I will see you all next week.